Imagine a life where anger no longer controls you, a life where calmness prevails, even in the most challenging situations. Anger is a natural human emotion, but left unchecked, can wreak havoc on our decisions, our relationships, our inner peace. But what if there were ancient strategies, tried and tested over centuries, that could help you master this powerful emotion? In this video, we delve deep into the timeless wisdom of Stoicism, guided by the teachings of Marcus Aurelius himself. We'll explore 7 powerful strategies to not only manage but transform your anger, turning moments of frustration into opportunities for growth and tranquility. These are not just philosophical musings. These are practical tools you can apply right now to live a calmer, more focused life. So if you're ready to break free from the grip of anger and step into a new realm of inner strength and serenity, keep watching. This journey could change everything. 1. The dichotomy of control. Let us begin with one of the most profound and liberating concepts in Stoicism, the dichotomy of control. Imagine waking up in Rome on a seemingly ordinary day. The sun rises over the Colosseum. The streets are bustling with merchants, and I, your humble philosopher emperor, sit down to reflect on the day's events. As an emperor, you might think my days are filled with luxury, but let me assure you, they are often filled with chaos, diplomatic disputes, military unrest, and of course, the occasional senatorial drama. It is easy to become overwhelmed, to let frustration boil over into anger. But I have learned through the teachings of Stoicism that there is a better way. One morning, I found myself particularly vexed. The Senate was in turmoil over a new law. The debate was fierce, the insults sharper than a Roman sword. I could feel the anger rising within me, that familiar heat starting to cloud my judgment. But then, I paused. I took a deep breath and reminded myself of a fundamental Stoic teaching, the dichotomy of control. What is within my power? What is not? You see, we often find ourselves getting angry over things that are entirely beyond our control. The weather, the actions of others, even the outcomes of events long past. But here's the trick. Only some things in life are within our control. What are they, you ask? Simple. Our thoughts, our actions, our responses. The rest? Well, those are like the rain that falls upon the city. You can curse it all you want. The rain will fall regardless. The key is in how you decide to dance in it. So that day in the Senate, instead of letting anger dictate my words, I chose a different path. I listened calmly, responded with reason, and most importantly, I let go of what was beyond my control. Outcome of the vote, the opinions of the senators. And you know what happened? They listened. Not because I commanded them as an emperor, but because I engaged them as a Stoic. Now, imagine you are a baker in ancient Rome. You've worked tirelessly through the night to prepare your famous bread, only for a soldier to come and demand it all for his unit, leaving you with nothing. The first instinct might be to rage against the injustice. After all, it's your bread. But remember, my friend, the dichotomy of control. Can you control the soldier's actions? No. Can you control your response to them? Absolutely. In this situation, instead of letting anger consume you, think of it as an opportunity. You might joke with the soldier, "Ah, a growing army needs its strength. Next time, leave a few loaves for the rest of us." A bit of humor can disarm the tension. And who knows, perhaps the soldier returns the favor with a story of his own, or, even better, some extra coin for your trouble. But even if he does not, your peace remains intact, untouched by external events. Think of your mind like a fortress. The things outside, what others do, what they say, even what happens around you, these are like the enemies outside your gates. They can shout, they can throw stones, but they cannot breach your walls unless you open the gates to them. Your thoughts, your actions, these are your defenders. Strong, vigilant, unyielding. Keep them sharp, and anger will find no entry. There was a time when I watched a young Roman guard, fresh from training, struggling to contain his frustration. He had been reprimanded by a senior officer, unfairly, in front of his peers. His face was red with rage, his fists clenched, ready to strike back. I approached him quietly and said, "Young man, can you control what your officer said?" He shook his head. "Then why give him the power over your peace?" "Yeah." He looked at me, confused. "What you can control," I continued, "is your response. Prove him wrong, not with anger, but with your conduct, your dedication." He smiled slightly, the anger slowly fading, replaced by a newfound resolve. He understood. He had a choice. So what's the takeaway here? Every time you feel that familiar surge of anger, ask yourself, is this within my control? If it is, great, take action. If it is not, let it go. Don't let external circumstances dictate your internal state. It's like being in a chariot race. Focus on your horses, your chariot, your path. The other racers, the dust they kick up, let them be. Your job is to reach the finish line with your composure intact. And trust me, my friends, there's no greater victory than winning over oneself. So the next time you find yourself in a situation where anger begins to flare, remember, you have the power to choose. You can't control the waves, but you can learn to surf. Master the dichotomy of control, and you master yourself. The rest, as they say, is just noise. 2. Negative visualization. Let us turn our attention now to a practice that may seem paradoxical to some, but is a cornerstone of Stoic wisdom. Negative visualization. Imagine, if you will, a practice where you deliberately picture the worst that could happen. Not to invite despair, but to fortify your soul against it. It sounds odd, doesn't it? But trust me, there is profound strength in this seemingly peculiar exercise. Let me share a story from my own life. As an emperor, I was constantly aware of the fragility of life and the uncertainty of events. Each day I would sit and imagine a variety of scenarios: the loss of a battle, the betrayal of a friend, the outbreak of a plague. Not because I wished for these things, because I wanted to prepare my mind. I imagined these scenarios vividly: pain, the hardship, the sorrow, and then I imagined myself overcoming them. Calm, resilient, unyielding. One day, a messenger arrived with news that a barbarian tribe had crossed the Danube, threatening our northern borders. Panic spread through the court like wildfire. Advisors shouted over each other, scrambling for solutions, their faces pale with fear. I could feel the familiar grip of dread tightening in the room, but not within me. I had already faced this scenario many times in my mind. I had prepared myself for this exact moment. So I stood up and calmly laid out a plan. We will fortify our positions, gather our allies, and prepare for a decisive counterattack. My advisors looked at me, surprised by my composure. But you see, I wasn't surprised by the news. By regularly practicing negative visualization, I had stripped away the element of shock. I had seen this all before in my mind, and because of that, I was ready. The battle was fierce, but we emerged victorious. Not because we were the strongest, because we were the most prepared. Imagine you are a Roman craftsman working on a delicate sculpture, a commission for a wealthy patron. You've spent weeks, months even, perfecting every detail. But what if tomorrow the sculpture shatters accidentally? Or worse, what if the patron decides he no longer wants it? Such thoughts could paralyze you with fear, make you cautious, make you timid in your work. But if you practice negative visualization, you accept these possibilities. You picture the sculpture breaking, the patron's displeasure. You feel the sting of it, yes, but you also see yourself moving past it. You see yourself starting anew, crafting something even better. And what does this do? Frees you. It frees you from the chains of fear and the tyranny of what if. By expecting the worst, you are prepared for it. And by being prepared, you find you have little to fear. Suddenly you can work with boldness, unafraid of failure, because you have already faced it in your mind and come out the other side stronger. Let us not forget the tale of a Stoic ship captain who sailed through the roughest of seas. For each voyage, he would sit on the shore, eyes closed, imagining his ship tossed by storms, the waves crashing over the deck, the mast breaking. He pictured the terror in his crew's eyes, the howling winds, the endless dark waters. But he also pictured himself at the helm, calm, directing his men, finding a way through the tempest. When the storm did come, as it always does, he was not paralyzed by fear. His crew looked to him, and seeing his calm demeanor, they took strength. "We faced worse in our minds," he'd tell them, "and we are still here." His ship sailed on, not because the seas were kind, but because the captain was ready. So how does this apply to you, the modern seeker of wisdom? Consider your daily life, the challenges you face, the setbacks, the uncertainties. Instead of shying away from these thoughts, confront them. Picture the loss, failure, the disappointment. Feel it in your heart. Let it wash over you. And then, in that very same moment, see yourself standing strong, moving forward undeterred. By doing this, you remove the sting of the unexpected. You make peace with all possible outcomes, and in that acceptance, find freedom. Freedom from fear, freedom from anger, freedom to act with courage and clarity. Negative visualization is not about inviting bad things to happen. It is about being ready for them when they do. So my friends, I encourage you to practice this art daily. Sit quietly, close your eyes, and imagine. See the challenges before they arise, feel the emotions, and then let them go. Prepare your mind, fortify your soul. For when you are prepared for the worst, you can face any storm with calm and grace. And remember, life is unpredictable, full of both light and shadow. Embrace it all, and let neither joy nor sorrow sway you from your path. With the strength of a Stoic, you will find that you are capable of enduring much more than you ever imagined. 3. Cognitive reframing. Now, let us turn our attention to a truly transformative practice: cognitive reframing. Imagine, if you will, that life is like a great Roman theater. Events unfold before us like a play, some tragic, some comedic, some thrilling, and some quite mundane. And yet, the way we experience these events depends not on the play itself, but on the role we choose to play and the perspective we decide to adopt. Allow me to share a story. One day, I was walking through the streets of Rome, disguised as an ordinary citizen, for even an emperor needs to feel the pulse of his people. I came across two men arguing fiercely. Cause? A simple piece of fruit, an apple that had fallen from a cart. One man insisted it was his, the other claimed he had seen it first. Their faces were red with anger, their words sharp as daggers. It was clear to me that the apple itself was not worth the strife. No, it was their perception of the situation, their belief that they had been wronged, fueled the fire of their argument. I approached them and asked, "Friends, why do you let a mere apple sow discord between you?" One of them replied, "It is the principle. I saw it first." The other, equally adamant, said, "But it rolled towards me. The gods intended it for me." I smiled and said, "What if I told you this apple is just an apple, neither blessed by the gods nor claimed by the fates? What if instead you saw it as an opportunity to share, show kindness rather than to bicker?" They paused, looked at each other, and the tension began to melt away. With a chuckle, they decided to split the apple, each taking a piece. What had changed? Not the apple, but their perception of it. This, my friends, is the power of cognitive reframing. Events are just events. It is our thoughts, our judgments, our interpretations that give them meaning. We are not disturbed by things, but by the views we take of them. As Epictetus wisely noted, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it matters. Let me give you another example from my time as a ruler. One afternoon, news reached me that a trusted advisor had betrayed my confidence, sharing sensitive information with a rival faction. My initial reaction was, of course, one of anger and hurt. How could someone I trusted so deeply turn against me? But then I paused. I took a breath and reminded myself that his actions were his own, and my reaction was within my control. I could choose to see this betrayal as a personal affront, or I could reframe it as a lesson, a reminder that even those closest to us are human and fallible. By choosing the latter, I found clarity. I decided not to retaliate with anger, but to address the matter with understanding and firmness. I spoke to him privately, not in anger, but in a spirit of correction and learning. Confessed his mistake, and we moved forward, stronger for the experience. The betrayal had not changed, but my interpretation of it had, and that made all the difference. Think of cognitive reframing as the art of turning the page. When faced with a challenge, a setback, or an insult, you have a choice. You can choose to see it as a stumbling block, or you can see it as a stepping stone. You can choose to see criticism as an attack, or you can see it as an opportunity for growth. The event remains the same, but the meaning you give to it is entirely up to you. Let us imagine a Roman mother, weary from a long day of tending to her home and children, her patience fraying. Her young son spills a cup of wine across the floor. The instinctive reaction might be one of frustration or anger. "Why are you so careless?" she might exclaim. But if she pauses, takes a breath, and reframes the situation, she might see it differently. She might think, "This is an opportunity to teach my son patience and responsibility. It is a chance for me to practice my own patience." And suddenly, the spilled wine is not a disaster, but a moment of connection, learning, Or consider the story of a merchant who loses a valuable shipment to a storm at sea. At first he might despair, feeling as though the gods themselves are against him. But if he reframes the loss, he might see it as a chance to diversify his business, to learn from the experience, become more resilient. He cannot change the past, but he can change his interpretation of it, and through that, can change his future. So how can you apply this in your own life? Begin by noticing your initial reactions. When something happens that stirs anger or frustration, pause. Ask yourself, is there another way to see this? What can I learn from this? How can I grow? Practice turning the page, rewriting the story in a way that empowers you rather than diminishes you. Remember, we are all authors of our own experience. The same event can be a tragedy or a triumph, defeat or a victory, depending on how you choose to see it. Embrace the power of cognitive reframing, and you will find that life is filled not with obstacles, but with opportunities. You hold the pen, write your story well. 4. The pause and reflect technique. There is a moment between stimulus and response, a precious fleeting moment where choice resides. This, my friends, is the essence of the fourth Stoic strategy, pause and reflect technique. In the heat of the moment, when anger swells within you like a storm at sea, it is easy to lash out, to let words fly unchecked, to let actions be dictated by impulse. But what if, instead, you could learn to pause, to take a deep breath, and to reflect? What if you could turn that brief moment into a sanctuary of calm, a place where reason reigns over emotion? Allow me to take you back to a time when I was faced with such a task. As an emperor, there were always those who sought to provoke me, to test my temper, to see if they could sway the course of my decisions with sharp words or subtle provocations. One day, during a heated council meeting, a young senator, eager to prove his worth, challenged my authority openly, accusing me of being too lenient with a certain policy. The room fell silent, all eyes upon me, waiting for my reaction. The old me might have reacted swiftly, perhaps with a sharp retort, a stern rebuke, or worse, a punitive measure. But instead, I paused. I could feel the anger rising, a familiar heat behind my eyes. But I took a breath and chose to reflect. I asked myself, why am I feeling this way? Is this anger justified? Or is it simply my ego reacting to a perceived slight? What would be the wisest course of action, not just for me, for the empire? And so, instead of reacting with anger, I chose a different path. I calmly asked the young senator to elaborate on his views. I listened, not just with my ears, but with an open mind. And you know what I discovered? He had a valid point. His approach was brash, yes, but his intentions were for the betterment of Rome. By pausing, I not only avoided a conflict, but also gained a new perspective, and, in turn, earned the respect of the Senate. Now, let us consider a more relatable scenario. Imagine a Roman artisan working tirelessly on a sculpture, masterpiece. Suddenly, a young apprentice, clumsy in his eagerness, knocks over a tool, causing the artisan's chisel to slip, leaving a deep, unintended mark on the stone. The artisan's first instinct might be to shout, to chastise the apprentice for his carelessness. But what if, instead, he paused? What if he took a moment to breathe, calm his racing heart, reflect on the situation? In that pause, he might realize that the apprentice did not intend to cause harm. He might see that his anger, while natural, serves no purpose but to create fear and resentment. And so instead of a harsh word, it offers a lesson, guiding the apprentice in the proper handling of tools. The unintended mark on the stone becomes a point of learning, a moment of growth. The atmosphere in the workshop remains one of calm and collaboration, rather than tension and fear. Pause and reflect technique is not about suppressing your emotions or denying your feelings. It is about giving yourself the space to understand them. Choose a response that aligns with your values and your goals. Imagine you are a mother. Your child has just spilled a pot of ink all over your freshly cleaned floor. Ink spreads, dark and unyielding, physical manifestation of the frustration bubbling up inside you. Your first instinct is to shout, to express your displeasure, to let the child know the gravity of their mistake. But instead, pause. Take a deep breath and think, what do I wish to teach my child in this moment? What example do I want to set? You reflect on the fact that accidents happen, that your child did not intend to cause trouble. So instead of anger, you choose patience. You calmly explain the consequences of carelessness, also express understanding, clean up the mess together, turning a potential moment of conflict into a moment of connection. Think of this technique as your shield against the arrows of anger. When you pause, you give yourself a chance to deflect, to choose a different path, to act with wisdom rather than react with wrath. It is like standing in the eye of the storm, where all is calm while chaos rages around you. In that calm, you find clarity. In that clarity, you find strength. But this technique is not only for grand moments of life. It is for the everyday, the mundane, the seemingly insignificant. When the bread burns in the oven, when the cartwheel breaks, when the child cries in the night. In every moment, you have the choice to pause, reflect, and to choose your response. Remember the words I have written in my meditations. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Pause and reflect technique is the embodiment of this truth. It is the practice of mastering yourself, your impulses, your reactions, and in mastering yourself, you find the greatest freedom of all. So, my friends, the next time you feel anger rising within you, remember this. Pause, reflect, breathe. In that moment, reclaim your power. Choose a response that aligns with your highest self, your deepest values. For it is in these moments, the small, everyday choices, that we shape our character, that we define who we are. And who we are is not dictated by our anger, by our wisdom, compassion, our strength. Let this be your guide. 5. Practice indifference. Now we turn to a practice that lies at the heart of Stoic philosophy, art of indifference. At first, this word, indifference, might seem cold or detached. But let us delve deeper, for there is profound wisdom in learning to remain unaffected by the ebb and flow of life's external events. Imagine standing atop a hill, looking down at the city of Rome. You see merchants haggling, soldiers marching, children playing, politicians debating. Life is unfolding in all its vibrant chaos below you. Yet from your vantage point, you remain untouched by it all. This is not because you are uncaring or aloof, but because you understand a fundamental truth. Much of what happens in life is beyond your control. It is neither inherently good nor bad. It simply is, and this is the essence of practicing indifference. Allow me to recount a personal story. During one particularly tumultuous period in my reign, I faced criticism from both the Senate and the people. Whispers filled the air, accusing me of favoring certain factions, of being too lenient with certain laws. It would have been easy, natural even, to feel anger or betrayal, to let their words pierce my heart. But I chose a different path. I reminded myself that their opinions, their judgments, were beyond my control. I could not dictate what they thought or said. What I could control was my response, my actions, my decisions. So I chose indifference, not indifference to my responsibilities or my duties, but indifference to the noise. I focused on what mattered, governing wisely, justly, in accordance with the principles of Stoicism. And over time, the noise faded, replaced by the quiet strength of a ruler who remains steady amidst the storm. Now, imagine you are a Roman baker, known throughout the city for your delicious bread. One morning, a customer storms in, shouting that your bread is too hard, too stale. The first instinct might be to defend yourself, to argue, to feel hurt by the harsh words. But what if, instead, you practiced indifference? You acknowledge the customer's complaint, without letting it affect your inner peace. You calmly offer to replace the bread or provide a refund, but you do not let their anger become your own. You remain composed, centered, and your day goes on undisturbed. This is the power of indifference. It is not about ignoring the world or becoming numb to life. Quite the opposite. It is about engaging with life fully, but without letting external events dictate your internal state. It is about recognizing that many things in life are indifferent. They do not inherently affect your virtue or your peace of mind unless you allow them to. Consider a story from my youth. I once watched a Stoic philosopher speak in the crowded marketplace. As he spoke, a man from the crowd shouted insults, mocking his teachings, calling him a fool. The philosopher, without missing a beat, continued his lecture. His face remained calm, his voice steady. When the crowd asked why he did not respond to the insults, he simply said, "That man's words reflect his own character, not mine. I choose not to let his anger disturb my peace." Think of the events in your life, frustrations, the disappointments, the slights. Friend forgets to return a borrowed item. A colleague takes credit for your work. The weather ruins your plan. In these moments, ask yourself, are these events within my control? Do they affect my ability to live a virtuous life? If the answer is no, practice indifferent. Let these things pass by you like a breeze passing through the leaves of a tree, felt but not clung to. One of my favorite metaphors is to think of yourself as a rock in the sea. The waves crash against you, sometimes gently, sometimes fiercely, but you remain solid, unmoved. The water flows around you, but it does not change you. This is what it means to practice indifferent. It is to remain steady, to remain true to yourself, regardless of the external circumstance. There's also humor in this, if you choose to see it. Imagine a Roman citizen standing in line at the public baths, only to be cut off by a more impatient fellow. First man, instead of reacting in anger, laughs to himself. Thinks, there goes another who lets the trivial dictate his peace. He practices indifferent, and his peace remains intact, while the other stews in frustration. And so I ask you, what trivialities are you letting disturb your peace? What external events beyond your control are you allowing to affect your inner state? Learn to practice indifferent. Let the world be what it is, and focus instead on who you choose to be. Remember, as I have often written in my meditations, receive without pride, let go without attachment. This practice is not easy. It requires vigilance, self-awareness, and a deep commitment to living in accordance with nature. But the reward is great, a life lived with tranquility, a mind untroubled by the opinions of others or the shifting fortunes of the world. So, the next time life throws a stone at your window, practice indifferent. Do not let it shatter your calm. Instead, let it remind you of your strength, your resilience, your ability to remain steadfast amidst the storms of life. In doing so, you will find that true peace comes not from the absence of conflict, from the presence of a calm, centered mind. Let this be your guide.
6. Journaling for self-reflection. There is a simple yet profound practice that I have found to be a cornerstone of my daily life, a practice that has guided me through moments of doubt, fear, and anger, a practice of self-reflection through journaling. It may seem like a humble act, the mere writing of thoughts on parchment, but do not be deceived by its simplicity. For in this practice lies the power to know oneself, to see one's mind clearly, and to grow stronger each day. Every evening, as the sun sets over Rome and the city begins to quiet, I take a moment to retreat to my study. There, amidst the soft glow of candlelight, I open my journal and I write. I reflect on the events of the day, the decisions I made, the words I spoke, the emotions I felt. I ask myself, did I act with virtue today? Was I patient? Was I kind? Did I allow anger or pride to cloud my judgment? These questions are not meant to chastise, but to illuminate, to see where I have faltered and where I have succeeded, and to prepare myself for the new day ahead. Allow me to share a story from my time as a ruler. It was during a particularly challenging period, when the empire was threatened on all sides by external forces and internal strife. I was weary, burdened by the weight of my responsibilities. One night, I found myself frustrated and angry, unable to sleep. Instead of allowing these emotions to fester, I turned to my journal. I began to write, pouring out my frustrations onto the page. But as I wrote, I found clarity. I began to see that my anger was not directed at any one person or event, but at my own feelings of helplessness. Through writing, I realized that while I could not control the actions of others, I could control my own thoughts, my own perspective. I could choose to focus on what I could change rather than dwell on what I could not. And so, my friends, I ask you, when was the last time you truly examined your own thoughts? When was the last time you sat with yourself in quiet contemplation and asked, why did I react this way? What does this say about me? The practice of journaling is not about writing for others. It is about writing for yourself. It is a dialogue with your own soul, a conversation with your inner self. Imagine a Roman soldier returning from a hard-fought battle. His body is bruised, his mind weary. He has seen things that haunt him, made decisions that weigh heavily on his conscience. He sits down with his journal and begins to write. At first, his words are filled with anger and confusion, but as he continues, a shift occurs. He begins to see patterns in his thinking, to understand his fears, his motivations. He begins to find peace, not because his circumstances have changed, but because he has gained insight into his own mind. Or think of a Roman merchant who, after a long day of bargaining in the market, comes home feeling defeated. His sales were low, his competitors fierce. He feels a knot of frustration in his chest, but instead of letting it consume him, he opens his journal and writes. He reflects on the day's events, asking himself, did I do my best? What could I have done differently? What can I learn from today's challenges? In the act of writing, he finds perspective. He realizes that while he cannot control the market, he can control his response to it. He resolves to try again tomorrow, armed with new insights. Journaling is a mirror for the soul. It allows us to see ourselves as we truly are, without the distortions of pride or ego. It is a practice that requires honesty, humility, and courage. To admit one's faults, to acknowledge one's fears, to confront one's deepest thoughts. These are not easy tasks, but they are essential for growth. For how can we hope to improve, to become better, if we do not first understand where we fall short? Consider the story of a wise old Roman matron who kept a journal throughout her life. Each night, she would write about her day, her interactions, her thoughts and feelings. And as she grew older, her journal became a treasure trove of wisdom, not just for herself, but for her children and grandchildren. They would read her words and see her struggles, her triumphs, her growth. Through her journal, she lived on, her wisdom guiding them long after she was gone. So, I urge you to take up this practice. Begin tonight. Find a quiet place, a moment of solitude. Open a notebook and write. Write about your day, your thoughts, your emotions. Write without fear, without judgment. Let the words flow from your mind to the page and see what insights emerge. You may be surprised at what you discover. And remember, as I have often reminded myself in my meditations, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Journaling allows us to see those thoughts clearly, to understand them, and to change them if necessary. It is a practice of continuous improvement, a tool for self-mastery. Do not let the busyness of life keep you from this simple yet powerful practice. For in the quiet moments of reflection, you will find not only yourself, but the path to true wisdom, true peace. Let journaling be your guide, your companion on this journey of life. In doing so, you will find that the greatest journey is not across seas or through battles, but within yourself. 7. Cultivate compassion and empathy. We arrive now at the final strategy, perhaps the most transformative of all, cultivating compassion and empathy. In our quest to master our emotions and navigate the complexities of life, we must not overlook the power of understanding the hearts and minds of others. It is a simple yet profound truth. By seeing the world through the eyes of others, by feeling with their hearts, we soften the sharp edges of anger and find a path to deeper connection and understanding. Let me share a story from my own life, a time when I was tested not in battle, but in my capacity for empathy. A senator, known for his abrasive demeanor, had openly criticized me in the Senate, questioning my leadership, my judgment. My first instinct was to respond with force, to silence him with my authority. But then I paused. I thought of him not as an adversary, but as a human being, flawed perhaps, but deserving of understanding. I considered the pressures he might be facing, the fears driving his harsh words, and instead of reacting with anger, I chose empathy. I invited him to speak with me privately. We sat together, not as ruler and subject, but as men seeking to understand one another. He shared his concerns, his worries for the future of Rome. In that moment, I saw not a critic, but a man driven by a deep love for his country. My anger dissolved, replaced by a sense of kinship. We found common ground, and from that day, he became one of my most trusted allies. This, my friends, is the power of empathy. It transforms adversaries into allies, strangers into friends. It allows us to see beyond our own perspective, to understand the world as others see it. When we cultivate empathy, we break down the walls that separate us, and we build bridges of understanding. Imagine a Roman farmer, his hands calloused from years of toil, watching as a neighboring farm encroaches upon his land. His first reaction might be to confront his neighbor, to demand justice, to let his anger flare. But what if, instead, he paused and considered the situation from his neighbor's perspective? Perhaps the neighbor, too, is struggling to feed his family, to keep his farm afloat. Perhaps he did not realize the encroachment. By approaching the situation with empathy, the farmer opens a dialogue, not a conflict. He finds a solution that respects both their needs, and a potential feud is turned into a partnership. Or think of a Roman mother, frustrated with her young daughter who is crying over a broken toy. The mother's first instinct might be to dismiss the tears, to see them as an overreaction. But by choosing empathy, she kneels down, looks her daughter in the eyes, and listens. She understands that to her daughter, this toy is not just an object, but a cherished friend. The mother's empathy calms her daughter, turns the tears into smiles, and deepens their bond. Empathy is not a sign of weakness, it is a strength. It requires us to step outside of ourselves, to put aside our judgments and preconceptions, and to truly see another person. It requires us to ask, what is this person feeling? What is driving their actions? How can I respond in a way that is kind and understanding? Consider the story of a wise Roman healer who, despite being insulted by a man who doubted his skills, chose to treat the man's sick child with utmost care. When asked why he did not retaliate or refuse service, the healer simply said, "I see a father's fear, not a man's insult." His harsh words are born from his love for his child and his fear of losing him. Who am I to respond to his fear with anger? Imagine applying this in your daily life. The colleague who snaps at you might be overwhelmed with stress. The friend who seems distant might be struggling with a personal issue. The stranger who cuts you off in traffic might be rushing to an emergency. By choosing empathy, you diffuse your own anger and open the door to understanding, to connection. Empathy and compassion are like a balm for the soul. They soothe the flames of anger and create space for healing, for growth. They remind us that we are all human, that we all suffer, that we all strive for happiness in our own ways. And when we remember this, it becomes much harder to hold on to anger. Think of it this way: when we see others as ourselves, flawed yet worthy of love and understanding, we begin to see their actions not as attacks, but as expressions of their own struggles. And in seeing this, we find it within ourselves to forgive, to show kindness, to extend a hand rather than a fist. So I ask you, the next time you feel anger rising within you, try this. Pause. Take a deep breath. And then ask yourself, what might this person be feeling? What might be driving their actions? How can I respond with empathy rather than anger? In that moment, you will find that your anger begins to dissolve, replaced by a sense of calm, of understanding. Remember, as I have often reminded myself, look beneath the surface. Let not the peculiar quality of a thing, nor its worth escape thee. Practice empathy and compassion, and you will find that the world is a much softer, kinder place. Not because it has changed, but because you have chosen to see it differently. In this, we find true mastery over ourselves, over our emotions, and in this mastery, we find peace. Let this be your guide, my friends. Cultivate empathy, nurture compassion, and you will find that the path to peace lies not in fighting anger, but in embracing understanding. As we come to the end of our journey through these 7 Stoic strategies, I invite you to reflect on what we have explored together. Each technique, from understanding what lies within our control to cultivating empathy, offers a path toward greater peace and mastery over our emotions. Anger is a natural response, but it need not dictate our lives. Instead, we have the power to transform it, to use it as a catalyst for growth, for strength, and for wisdom. Remember, the greatest victory is not in conquering others, but in conquering oneself. By practicing these Stoic principles, you can learn to face life's challenges with calm, clarity, and resilience. You can become the master of your own mind, unshaken by the storms of the external world. So take these teachings to heart. Apply them in your daily life, in moments big and small. Let them guide you toward a life of tranquility and virtue. For it is in this journey, this daily practice of self-improvement, that we find true freedom and true peace. Thank you for joining me on this path of wisdom. May you walk it with courage, with patience, and with an ever-growing sense of inner calm.